Rio de Janeiro is not one city. It never has been. Open Google Maps, find Rio, switch to 3D view, and look carefully. You will see two completely different urban realities sharing the same geography. One has clean lines, planned streets, formal architecture. The other erupts from the hillsides like something that grew rather than something that was built. The residents of the first call themselves people of the asphalt. The residents of the second are people of the hill. 25% of Rio's population lives on that hill. Over 1.7 million people. That division was not an accident. Brazil imported 11 times more slaves than the United States. Rio alone held more enslaved people than the entire American South. When slavery ended in 1888, freed men and women were given their freedom and nothing else. No land, no rights, no housing. So they built their own, on the hillsides nobody else wanted. The city was never designed to include them. It still has not decided whether it wants to. Cocaine arrived in Rio in the 1980s and it changed everything. Not gradually. Rapidly. The money it generated was unlike anything the favelas had ever seen, and it flowed directly into the hands of the people who were already there, already organized, already angry. The Red Command did not begin as a drug cartel. It began as a political rebellion. Leftist prisoners inside Ilha Grande Penitentiary in the 1970s organized along ideological lines, building internal codes of conduct, hierarchies, and a shared identity rooted in opposition to the Brazilian military dictatorship. When those men were released, they brought the organization with them into the favelas. Then cocaine arrived and the ideology evaporated. What remained was the structure, the discipline, and the willingness to use violence. The Red Command became the most powerful criminal organization in Rio de Janeiro, with its headquarters embedded deep inside Complexo do Alemão, a vast interlocking block of favelas that the city has never fully controlled. The reason gangs took root is not complicated. They moved into a vacuum. No zoning, no municipal services, no courts, no police presence that functioned as anything other than an occasional and brutal intrusion. In the absence of every institution that normally organizes urban life, the gangs provided order. They arbitrated disputes. They taxed local commerce. They punished theft within their territory because theft was bad for business. They were not a replacement for government. They were what happens when government is never present to begin with. The line between a gang-controlled favela and a so-called pacified one has never been clean. In many communities that the city formally declared secure, the Red Command never actually left. It simply became less visible. Violence in these places is not chaos. It is a business model. It is calculated, territorial, and entirely rational from the perspective of people who were handed no other economy and built one from what was available. Set aside the statistics for a moment. Set aside the gang territories and the police kill rates and the geopolitical analysis of organized crime. Walk into Rocinha. Rocinha is Brazil's largest favela. It sits on a steep hillside in Rio's south zone, wedged between two of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country, and it functions as a complete city within a city. Its residents built their own water distribution networks when the municipal system never arrived. They wired their own electricity when the grid stopped at the favela's edge. They created community associations to manage public projects, allocate resources, and mediate disputes because no city planner ever drew a blueprint for this place. The blueprint does not exist. What exists instead is decades of improvised, compounding, remarkably functional human ingenuity. In Vidigal, a favela perched above the ocean not far from Rocinha, a man named Paulo transformed a hillside that was buried under 15 years of accumulated garbage into a working fruit garden. Every structure in that garden was built from discarded materials. He did not apply for a permit. He did not consult an authority. There was no authority to consult. He simply decided the hill could be something other than a dump and made it so. In Providencia, near the port zone, a photographer named Mauricio lives in a house that looks out over the favela he has documented for years. He photographs corruption. He photographs cartel activity. He photographs police misconduct. Then he distributes the images to a network of local and international media contacts. People have learned not to interfere with him. His camera is the only functioning accountability mechanism his community has ever had. In Marais, residents built art centers. They commission artists. They construct scale models of their own favela from recycled wood. The same informality that allowed gangs to take root also allowed this. Creativity and violence growing from identical soil. That is the paradox Rio never resolves. In 2008, Rio decided it had a solution. The city assembled specialized police units called pacification police units and deployed them into the favelas with a specific mandate: enter, displace the gangs, and hold the territory. The program had a name, it had funding, it had political will behind it. And in the beginning, in certain places, it appeared to work. Santa Marta was the showcase. A relatively small favela in the South Zone, it received the city's best officers, the most resources, and the most sustained attention. The gangs were pushed out. Most services arrived. Michael Jackson had filmed a music video there years earlier. Now it became the proof of concept that pacification could function. The city pointed to Santa Marta and said, "This is what the future looks like." The future did not scale. Complexo do Alemão is not Santa Marta. Marais is not Santa Marta. The larger favelas required not a showcase operation but a sustained, years-long institutional commitment that the city was never equipped to deliver. And underneath the operational failures was something more corrosive. The instrument Rio chose to restore order was a police force with a documented history of extraordinary violence. Human Rights Watch has recorded that police in the United States kill one person for every 37,000 arrests. In Rio, that number is 1 in every 23. The communities the pacification program was designed to protect were being asked to trade gang violence for state violence and call it progress. By the mid-2000s, pacification had effectively collapsed. Gangs that had been displaced returned. Territories that had been declared secured reverted. The UPP program was quietly wound down. What remained was the fundamental problem the program had never actually addressed. The favelas did not develop gang control because of a policing deficit. They developed it because the state was absent for generations before any gang arrived. Force cannot undo decades of abandonment. It has never been able to. The gangs did not retreat when pacification failed. They consolidated. Today, Rio's criminal geography is not shrinking. It is hardening into something more permanent and more complex than a simple drug cartel problem. A second armed power has emerged alongside the traditional gang structure, and this one is more difficult to confront because it wears the same uniform as the state. Militia groups, composed largely of off-duty and former police officers, now control significant portions of Rio's territory. They do not traffic cocaine. They traffic extortion. They charge residents for the right to use gas, internet, cable television, and transportation within their controlled zones. They are organized crime with institutional cover, and they are expanding. Rio now operates under a triangle of armed power. Drug gangs control the traditional favela territories. Militias control the peripheral neighborhoods and the urban edges. And a police force that has never been effectively reformed operates according to its own internal logic, which frequently has more to do with personal enrichment and factional loyalty than public safety. Why civilians navigate between all three. None of the three represent their interests. The economic consequences are measurable. Tourism revenues are suppressed by security perceptions. Foreign investment carries a risk premium that comparable cities do not face. Quality of life indices place Rio among the most dangerous major cities in the Western Hemisphere. Rio hosted the 2016 Olympics. The world watched the opening ceremony. The world did not watch what was happening in Complexo do Alemão and Marais during the same weeks where residents were caught between competing armed factions in conflicts that received no international coverage because the cameras were pointed at the stadium. That is the performance Rio has always staged for outside audiences. Safety on the postcard. War on the hill. The two realities have coexisted for so long that the city has stopped pretending they are temporary. They are the architecture now. Rio is not an exception. That is the most important thing to understand about it. What happened in Rio's favelas is a pattern, not an anomaly. It is repeated across Caracas, across Medellin, across Cape Town, across every city on earth that built itself around a division it refused to name. When a government withdraws from a community or never arrives in the first place, something always moves into that space. The question is never whether the vacuum will be filled. The question is what fills it. Sometimes it is mutual aid and extraordinary creativity. Sometimes it is armed control and systematic extortion. In Rio, for 1.7 million people, it has been both simultaneously produced by the same conditions, and growing from the same roots. The favela is not a failure of the people who live in it. It is a measurement. It measures precisely how much a city was willing to invest in its own population and where it decided to stop. Every unplanned water network, every self-built electricity grid, every community association that formed because no municipal body ever showed up, is a data point in that measurement. Paulo's garden is a data point. Mauricio's camera is a data point. The Red Command's cocaine economy is a data point. They are all answers to the same question. What do people do when the city leaves them alone on a hill with nothing? No military operation in Rio's history has resolved what economics and exclusion created. The UPP program proved it. Sending armed men into communities built by abandonment does not address abandonment. It addresses the symptoms while the disease continues. The gangs did not create Rio's crisis. They inherited it from a city that made a decision more than a century ago about which of its residents deserved to be included in the plan. That decision has never been formally reversed. The hill is still waiting. The hill,